Hey guys, what is up? This is Phil, but we are looking at the Frozen Thorns Frost Mage build in Undecember. This build is going to utilize Frost Thorn and Thorn Explosions. So we're doubling up on the Thorns, and this has to be one of the hardest hitting builds in the entire game right now because we're using Frost Thorn, which has you hitting the target repeatedly with Thorns. With this build, we're going to be shooting over 10 Thorns out every single time we cast, and every single one of those will hit the enemy. Furthermore, we are going to be activating to Thorn Explosions, which is going to create an area that causes frozen thorns to erupt from the ground, and finishing off with one very large thorn that does big damage. So one thing that you do need to note about this build is that it is not the best build for farming, but if you're looking for really big damage, this is the build for you. So that's the high level view of it, but let's go ahead and jump into the details. Okay, for our primary skill, we are going to be using Frozen Thorn. Frozen Thorn, you are going to fire multiple projectiles at the enemy, and this Frost Thorn count is these multiple projectiles we're talking about. This number can be increased with things like Multishot, and then we have another way we'll be able to increase this Thorn count. So even though it says 4 right here, we're actually going to get this to more than 10 Thorns. So you will be firing in rapid succession Thorns, and every single one of those will hit your target. So you're going to do big damage. This is one of the hardest hitting abilities in the game when we're talking about doing damage against one or a handful of enemies. You're also going to get a nice spell critical damage multiplier on this, so big crit damage, and then critical chance increase on this as well. So this is one of the easier skills to get to crit cap in the game. When these additional thorns hit, they are going to do damage at less damage here, so there will be damage dampening of 15% after the first thorn has hit. So like we said earlier, there's more ways to increase the amount of thorns you have, and the other way that we can do that is by getting cold energy. So for every 2 cold energy that we get, we are going to get an additional Frost Thorn. We need to be able to build cold energies. By default, you can get a maximum of 5. We're going to want to try to increase our maximum cold energies that we can get to 6 so that we can get +3 Frost Thorns, and we will talk about how we do that later. But the way we will be generating these cold energies is going to be through extract energy, and we will dive a little bit deeper into this later. So let's look at the awakenings real quick here. When we awaken, we are going to be going for Origin to get this damage dampening decrease. Remember earlier we said that the following thorns after the first thorn have 15% damage dampening. This will lower that number by up to 10%. So you're looking to get as close to -10 as possible. Verity is slightly better for mapping, but Origin is just going to be the best all around awakening. So that's what we will go with. Moving on, we are going to look at Thorn Explosion. The way Thorn Explosion works is when we hit our target, thorns will come out of the ground and hit a few times, and then follow up with one really large thorn. But do note it does take a little bit of time for all the damage to occur. All right, so let's look at the specifics of Thorn Explosion. It is a physical element. We will be converting this to cold damage to match with Frost Thorn. The bleed chance will go away whenever we convert to cold element, but no big deal. The bleed doesn't really do that much damage. And like we said earlier, you place thorns down and you'll have this first thorn attack, which will hit 3 times at a 0.3 second interval. So it will take close to 1 second for the first thorn attack, and then the second thorn attack will occur after that. The second thorn attack is going to hit for a much larger amount than the first thorn attack. And when we look at awakenings, the one we will be going with is going to be Source to get the 2 lines of amplification to get really big damage. Origin is going to create 3 projectiles or 3 area of effects. So we saw 1 earlier. This will give you 3 instead and take away that second attack. So if you want to use this for mapping, then this is the better option. However, this one, Source, is going to give you way more damage. That's the one I have chosen. For our movement, we are going to go with Roll. Roll is my favorite movement ability just because you get 2 max use count by default, and it has a really low cooldown. Next up, for our attack enhance, we're going to be using Release Element to get a large element damage amplification and cast speed buff. Our defense enhance, Siphon Life to get big HP absorb on hit, so essentially a life leech cooldown. This one in general gives you way more health back than Tenacious Regeneration, but it does have the downside of not getting that big bump in HP initially that Tenacious Regeneration has. So if you like having an extra health potion on hand, essentially, then Tenacious Regeneration is a good option, but Siphon Life will give you more overall life gained, and that's why I'm going with it in this build. I do tend to like Siphon Life a little bit more in long range builds, and this is a long range build since Frostthorn is our primary ability. Next up, we are using Illusion Hook, and the reason I'm using Illusion Hook is because when we use this, we are going to be triggering to Blizzard. So the way we're going to achieve that is by triggering with the spell activation on hit rune. And the reason we use this is because it gives us a big skill rune cooldown dampening. So this is going to lower the cooldown of Blizzard significantly. By default, the cooldown's like around 30 seconds, but this drops it down to where this is something we can use very, very often. You can lower this cooldown even more if you throw time acceleration on it. So if I were to throw that on it, this could get it down even further. The entire point of the Illusion Hook is to trigger to Blizzard. Now, you don't have to use Illusion Hook. You can use something else to trigger to it, but I think Illusion Hook is a good option because it adds the vulnerable effect, slowing down enemies. And when you awaken it to source, you're going to be able to inflict a pain effect. The pain effect is going to give damage increase of 10% plus an additional 50% on top of that. So 15% additional damage taken on top of casting Blizzard. The reason we want to cast Blizzard from that is Blizzard is going to chill, freeze, and then also stack this cold wave debuff enemies that it hits. The cold wave debuff is going to increase cold damage taken. So not only are we going to get the pain debuff to increase damage taken to enemies, but they will also take more cold damage. It stacks 5 times. Where this is at right now for me is kind of low, but just to give you an idea, you can get this up to 3.5% cold damage taken per stack. And then if you awaken this, you can get even more stacks. So you can get up to 7 stacks of this. So that's like close to 25% additional cold damage. So I'll show you real quickly what this looks like. You're just going to cast your Illusion Hook and it triggers the Blizzard and stacks the debuff. So they're going to get hit with that pain effect and then also cold wave, taking a lot of extra damage. If you're going to use your release element, your attack enhance, you're going to want to use these at the same time to get really, really big damage. Stack these if you can. Finally, we are going to be taking Seal of Critical Chance as our attack seal. This is the best one to use if you are not crit capped. If you are at or near crit cap, then Seal of Condensed Elements is the better option. All right, let's go ahead and look at our links. For Frostthorn, we are going to be using Quick Cast. This is going to give us a big boost in our cast speed. This one is essential if you are not cast speed capped. This is probably your best rune. Not only does it increase your Frostthorn, but it gets your Thorn explosions out faster. So this is a big buff to both our skills. Element damage amplification is a very straightforward and good rune to use for a nice boost to element damage amp. And then Multishot is another rune that we are going to use to get additional projectiles. So the reason we want these additional projectiles here is because, again, this increases our Frostthorn count, and it's going to allow us to shoot out way more Thorn. Every single one of these Thorns that hits is going to do this cold damage, so this is a huge multiplier to our damage. The next rune we are going to use here is going to be Extract Energy, and this is one of the reasons I love playing Frostthorn so much, is because it will allow us to build up cold energies, which is going to decrease element damage, but also at the same time increase the damage to our Frostthorn. Let me explain how that happens. If you're not familiar with energies, cold element decreases element damage by 3% per stack. By default, you're able to get to 5 stacks of energy. So we will be able to get up to 5 stacks of cold energy. Remember, we need 2 cold energies to get an extra Frostthorn, so we need to get an additional energy. We need to get up to at least 6. There are other ways to increase this further, but I'm just going to talk real quickly about how we get this up to 6 to get 3 additional Frostthorns. But for now, know that the maximum amount of cold energies we can get is 5 if we don't increase it further. Now let's talk real quickly about how we can raise our max fixed energy from 5 to 6. The easiest way we're going to be able to do this is in the Zodiac tree. What you're going to do is you're going to come here into tree 9, go to atmospheric pressure, and then put 5 points up the top here to get this fixed max cold energy. So that is going to let us hit our enemies, and we're going to build up our cold energy down here, and you should have this the entire time you're playing after a certain amount of time. These 6 cold energies are going to give us 3 additional Thorns. Now, with that being said, there are other ways to increase cold energy. I'm not going to go too much deeper into that in this video, but if you're interested in learning a lot more about extract energy and how energies work in the game, I do have a tutorial on that, and I will drop a link in the description below to that video. So check that out if you're interested, and you will learn a lot more about how energies work in the game. Energies are really, really great. They open up a lot of interesting builds, so it's important to know about them and understand how they work. Highly recommend that video. Next up, the rune that you are going to want to use if you want to do some mapping with this build is going to be Chain. Chain is going to allow us to hit multiple enemies at the same time. If you are going to use this to map, I recommend you bringing this up to the legendary level and awakening this immediately to get the additional 2 chains right here to bring up to 4 chain count. This is going to allow you to hit way more enemies. So the way it works is when you hit a mob, it's going to bounce and hit all these other enemies. So it will chain, it will hit one and bounce off to other mobs. So if you're doing mapping, definitely get this, invest in it really early on. But if you're doing content that is more single target, like raid bosses, then you could just take that off and put something like Find Weakness on if you're not crit capped. This is a really good one. Lingering Chill is also very nice. Lingering Chill is going to give big chill effect, which slows enemies. So if you look at it, it slows enemies' attack and movement speeds, while at the same time adding damage and damage amplification. So this one is nice. And then I also like Cold Penetration for damage. We are then going to be activating to Thorn Explosion. On Thorn Explosion, we are going to be using Strike to get a big strike damage amplification boost. And don't worry about the cast speed dampening. This is the activated spell, so that doesn't matter. I also put Mana Storm on Thorn Explosion, as this tends to be very low mana cost skill. And then we're converting to cold damage, and you can't go wrong with the element damage amplification rune. If you're going to be mapping, use Area of Effect. It's going to make your Thorn Explosion much larger. If you want maximum damage, take it off and put the concentrated area damage rune on it. So for Zodiac, we're looking at stats. You're going to need enough intelligence to run Frostthorn and nothing more. Put the minimum amount there and then dump everything else into strength. As far as dexterity goes, I don't think you need to put anything into dexterity whatsoever. I have some points into dexterity because I do have some armor dodge hybrid gear, which requires a little bit of dexterity. Honestly, you don't need any. And actually, for this build, I think in terms of gearing, I would lean towards armor and barrier gear. You probably want to get your armor up towards 75% cap and then start working in barrier from there. But that's what I would do with stats, and I'd try to avoid dexterity completely. As far as the individual zodiacs go, I'm not going to go into it in detail, but if you need some additional mana in tree 3, there's Unos. To drop these points in here to get some additional mana. Also in tree 7, you have Dust, and you can get some mana potion effectiveness there. I also want to point out in tree 7, we have Deadly Poison, and in Deadly Poison, you are going to grab these points here to get this additional damage against chilled enemies. We do chill enemies a lot with this build. And then I'm also grabbing this 1 point here. Apply chill is 10% amplified damage. Basically, what this means is if we inflict chill, we are going to get a 10% damage increase to our enemies. Now, if you know anything about Shock, Shock is also a debuff which gives 20% amplified damage. In this build, we do not have a way to consistently shock. Chill is going to be a nice consolation for not having shock, so we will get 10% there. However, there is still a chance in this build that you can apply shock. We will talk about that in just a minute here. You can't read it here, but this is additional chill effect to slow enemies down. If you want to grab that point, go for it. Again, you want to drop the points here in atmospheric pressure to get this additional fixed max cold energy if you need to get up to another even number. So every 2 max cold energies gets you an additional thorn for your frost thorn. So you want to make sure you have an even number, 6, 8, 10. That's what you want to go for. And if this 1 point will get you to that even number, definitely drop that point there. Also, farmer, you want to get these points here if you're low on HP. This is also a build that I would think you want to build some barrier in, and so grabbing some of these points for barrier I think are good as well. Moving on to our specialization, we are 100% going to grab Brilliance, go up, grab Acceleration to get this cast speed, movement speed gain. Also grabbing cast speed amp and resource cost dampening, big nice node here. Grabbing Overpower to get the flat damage increase and the element penetration, and finally the strike damage amplification. In Vacuum, we are going to be going down here, grabbing Knowledge, gives us a nice cast speed and spell damage boost, getting damage amplification here. This does amplify the damage taken by element, but this 15% element damage amplification is just too nice. You got to grab it. We're going to go up, grab Sharpness, and get crit rate, crit damage. And then once you get your 9 points, you can finish it off with Sharpness and then the spell crit damage. And then finally, I'd say go for Pirate. It does slightly more damage in my testing. I'm grabbing this damage amplification here, and I'm also coming down grabbing this damage amp against debuffed enemies. Chill is a debuff, so we will pretty much have this additional 5% all the time. And then we are going to grab this node here, which is additional lightning damage equal to 10% of damage on every hit. So even though we are cold damage, we will get an additional 10% damage, and it will be applied as lightning. And since we will be doing lightning damage, we will have a chance to apply shock. As monster level increases, the chance of shock kind of goes down because we're not doing as much lightning damage, and inflicting that status is dependent on the amount of strike damage you deal. So your chances go lower, and that's why we do grab that 1 point down here for apply chill as amplified damage, because if the shock debuff is not up, we will at least get our 10% amplified damage. Just one note, if shock and chill are both up, they don't stack. You don't get the 20% amplified from the shock debuff plus the 10% amplified from chill. It's going to take the one that has the highest amount of amplified damage when damage is assessed. So keep that in mind. And then I like to grab the 2 status effect rate points here. This is going to give us more consistent chills and shocks. Now, I will say this, if your cast speed is really, really low, like under 4, then I think that this is also a really good tree. And what I would do is I would come down here and get this cast speed amplification, and then also this element damage amplification up here. Now, as far as gear stats, charm blessings you should be going after, and relic information, all of that is going to be down in the description of the video. But if you have any questions about the build, or if I haven't explained something clearly enough, then drop your question in the comments area. I'd love to hear from you guys. Is there any other ways that we can improve it? Drop that in the comments as well. But if the build has been helpful at all, do me a solid and give me a like and a subscribe, as it helps me out a lot. But I've got to get back to the grind, so I will catch you guys later.